First of all, I think the situation in Ukraine at one level was predictable, not only because of what has happened in the last recent weeks with the buildup of Russian troops along the border, but because there is a long antecedent and historical roadway to this particular conflict that may in fact go back as far as the tearing down of the Berlin Wall and the decisions that were made then about, for example, how far NATO would move eastward, and the tense dynamics that have been building within Russia with respect to some of these former territories over decades since the fall of the Soviet Union. And finally, because perhaps there was a certain level of real joyfulness on the part of the West with the fall of the Soviet Union that helped drive some of the values and tensions that we see being played out today. So the first thing I would say is that the circumstance was probably, in one sense, very much predictable. But what has happened there is a travesty for the world. We are seeing a sovereign country being invaded for no purpose by another. We are seeing the bombardment of the cities, towns in that country, causing massive damage to infrastructure and life support systems and to life itself. We're seeing the death of children and women, and old people, and even people who are simply trying to get out of the country are suffering from bombings which are killing them when they are incredibly exposed on the road trying to reach neighboring countries and so on. And we see, of course, now the great shift, don't we, in the geopolitical world. I mean, many of the countries that are in discussions here with France, Germany, the United States, Britain, Russia itself, they all have nuclear armaments. And so all of them must be cautious about how far this conflagration can go before it truly becomes a world conflict. And so we begin to see the many tensions that are building up now, and how the West and NATO are trying to adjust their policies to make sure that they help Ukraine, which is a clear and obvious desire on the part of many nations, but to not wade into this conflict and so make it a far worse one for everyone else in the world. But this does pose, doesn't it, an incredibly difficult moral dilemma. How long do you wait when you see the atrocities being committed? Forget for the moment that obviously Mr. Putin has taken Russia and the Russian people, who in many cases are rather innocent in this, if we could say, that he has taken them down a road where it will be very hard for them to come back into the mainstream of the international order anytime soon. And therefore he has potentially damaged his own country severely, a country that has its own extraordinary history. And then the West trying to watch its moves so carefully, and yet every day someone's child, someone's mother, someone's brother, someone's uncle or grandmother dies in that country simply because another regime decided to aggressively move in with its armaments. I view this as potentially the passing of an age. We have been a long time since the Second World War. Generations of us have been born who have never fought and who never will now fight in a conflict of that kind. And we are in a world that's vastly different from the end of the Second World War in so many ways. Integrated economies in ways that we could not have imagined, integrated families that have, traveled all around the world, cultures that have been mixed and admixed. All of this is making it a much more difficult proposition to decide what effectively to be able to do to help the citizens of Ukraine. I think this conflict has the potential to widen significantly. I do not see any way out for Mr. Putin in terms of options here. He either takes Ukraine and puts in a puppet government, or he will be defeated there by some series of forces that we cannot yet envisage. But in the end, the idea of a forever peaceful Europe that might periodically be upset by smaller regional conflicts is now put at risk. And I think this sense of stability and that the idea that global war was really behind us, I think that idea has been severely challenged. And finally, in a very perverse way, it has probably finally strengthened in the minds of a lot of people that we truly are a global citizenry now. We rely on one another's economies and one another's energy sources and one another's other natural resources in ways that makes it very, very, very difficult for us to dissociate ourselves from those bridges and those connections. And that makes our moral decisions even more difficult.